Welcome, everyone. My name is Adele Lafrance, and I'm a co-developer of Emotion-Focused Family Therapy. I'm your host for today's webinar. The webinar presenter is Kristin Edstrom, and she is from British Columbia. She's going to be talking about EFFT, but from the lens of moving from script to stance. And it's a great topic. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Kristin has to say. And just a reminder that if you haven't donated yet, we'd really appreciate any amount to help us to continue to be able to offer these clinician webinars. So thank you, Kristin, for joining us today. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. So I want to talk a little bit about script to stance and what that means. And I really feel a subtitle for this can be becoming fluent in EFFT. I really have felt over the time that I have worked with EFFT that it really is almost like learning how to speak another language. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the script to stance agenda came to be and how this webinar came together. Much like most people, I did my first EFFT training in a 2-day session back in May 2017. I really had very little idea about EFFT. My mentor was very passionate about it, invited me to come to the training, and I was honestly, to be totally blunt with you, really skeptical. I remember when Natasha and Adele were setting up the chairs at the front of the room, and we're kind of getting everyone anxious about, having to go up and present. And I was like, they're never going to make us go up there and do that. So I went in with a very skeptical lens on that first day. By the end of the first day, I was doing a demonstration with Adele, bawling my eyes out up at the front. And at that point in time, really began to understand the value of learning this language because I had experienced it personally. And after 2 days of that level 1 training, I was absolutely transformed and really started to see how effective EFFT could be. So you get out of that 2-day training, I think, not unlike most of you, I was really pumped, really wanted to try this. It was so different than a lot of other therapies that I had used or studied before. And then after a couple of days, I felt I wasn't using it. I wasn't using this in sessions. I was a little bit nervous to speak this new language. When parents were calling for me to see their kids, I was not saying to the parents, hey, I want to see you instead. I was still seeing the kids. The blocks, I wasn't really getting them. I was starting to use a little bit more validation in my practice. I was starting to explain the concept around EFFT to more friends and family, but I wasn't really speaking the language yet. So I decided to do advanced training about 6 months later. And in the advanced training, if some of you have been there, you know that you do a lot of practice works with the blocks. If you want, you do a lot of personal practice works with the blocks as both a clinician, sometimes playing the parent role, and you can use incidents from your own life, which I personally felt made it so much more impactful. And after that 2 days of training, knowing that we could now have this beautiful handout in front of us that Adele demonstrated in a video, having created the therapy, but seeing her have the piece of paper in front of her as she did the chair work with a client, I thought, okay, that's something that I can actually now, after practicing it for 2 days, take back and use in my practice. And again, saw the power through being able to practice it with personal scenarios in my life. So started to incorporate it a little bit more into the work that I was doing. When parents would call, I would ask them to come in for a coaching session and really preface it that way. Still saw the kids, but really saw the impact of seeing the parents more and more. So after the advanced training, then I started to do some supervision sessions with Adele, which were incredibly helpful. Really intimidating at first. I've told Adele that meeting with her and doing supervision sessions with her is like just going for a friend with coffee, except that friend that you're going for coffee is actually the Queen of England. Like, that's how it kind of felt. You know, there's this level where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm making so many mistakes and she knows this stuff so well. But once I could get past that and just be really vulnerable with her about the things that I really had no clue about, the things that I was really blocked with, it was really good to practice the language of EFFT with someone that was so incredibly fluent in it. So that was supervision sessions after the first 2 trainings. And then in late spring, I wanted to train with Adele to become a parent and caregiver workshop provider. And so really focused on the concepts that were tricky to me as a therapist in teaching this new language to other families. So it was like having, I said it was like having the dictionary and thesaurus of EFFT open all at once and being able to go over any concepts that I was still really unsure about, any pronunciation, if we wanted to use the language lens, that I didn't get. After becoming certified to be able to train parents and caregivers in workshop format, then I attended a second advanced training in the spring of 2008, and this time went back as a helper, and was starting to speak the language so much that I could help others determine what the blocks were when they were doing Chairwork. And I found that EFFT was now finding a home in my head and in my heart, and it was just flowing out of me as a way of communicating. And then I attended a caregiver training presented by Elspeth Humphreys in late spring of 2018. And that was really good, just to see how a caregiver workshop is actually carried out over a 2-day period, which was fantastic. So that brings me to presently, and this is, I mean, really, this is all in the space of about 1.5 years. So presently, I present and I teach EFFT at various forums. When parents call about me seeing their kids, I ask them to come in for coaching. I use Chairwork, and although I still stumble at times, I feel like I'm becoming more and more fluent, and I can teach this to others. And I really do believe, from personal experience and then what I have seen in my practice, in the healing power of EFFT. So here is some of the initial feedback when I start talking with families about EFFT, and after an initial session, they go home and practice it. Here's some of the feedback that I hear from parents. So I tried it once, maybe twice, didn't really work. It was explained to me in a PowerPoint and haven't practiced it since. My kids saw through me. They felt it was so fake because it was so different than how I usually talk to them. I didn't know if I was validating the right emotion. So I didn't know if I was saying, I can understand that you might feel blank because they didn't think that they were getting the emotion right. I didn't have any becauses. I was drawing blanks on the becauses when we talk about validation. I'm too exhausted to be present with them in this way, and I've done enough to screw them up, and I don't want to mess it up more. So those are some of the common feedback that I hear from parents, caregivers, after a session, maybe 2, of explaining the basics of EFFT to them. I would love to hear the feedback that you as clinicians get from the folks that you teach EFFT to initially, because I think it would probably be very in line with this. And this is the truth. I lived in Germany for 6 months when we were first married, and I would go out and try and speak German, which I do not do well whatsoever. I knew the very basics, but as soon as I started speaking bad German, the Germans started speaking really good English back to me. And so my motivation to continue on speaking German was very limited at that time. However, if they would have practiced with me a little bit and encouraged me, I probably would have continued to try and speak it a little bit more. So this is not unusual for parents and caregivers to come back with this feedback into your office. And this is why we, as providers of information to the caregivers and parents and teachers, cannot be discouraged when they come back discouraged. We have to understand that they are learning this new language, and for us to just even become more fluent and more confident in the language that we speak, so we can tell them, you're doing a great job. I know it's tough. I know it's tricky. It was tricky for me too. So I would love to go over the core beliefs. And the reason why I go over the core beliefs and the foundations of EFFT is because it just solidifies why we are doing this form of therapy in the first place. It builds the foundation. I oftentimes will go over a few of these points, if not all of them, with parents or caregivers. So I just want to go over them. I think that we have probably all seen these, but I do think it's an important piece to go back to time and time again. Anytime that I present on EFFT, whether it's to professionals who have done the trainings or whether it's to parent groups, I will go over the core beliefs because they really are the foundation of the language that we're teaching. So the first is that we believe in the extraordinary healing power of caregivers. They need to know that we believe in their extraordinary powers, and that they can really be the healing agents of change for their kids. The second is we believe that caregivers can learn enough of the skills they need to become their loved one's recovery coach. And the emphasis here is on enough. As I'm talking about us becoming fluent in the language of EFFT. I am not insinuating at all that parents need to become as fluent as we do as clinicians. That's not the goal. The goal is for them to learn enough of the skills they need to become their loved one's recovery coach. We believe that they are the experts in their kids' lives. They have had, from birth to however old the kid is, they've had that many years with their child. They are the experts in that. We may be very skilled in the schooling that we've had, in the EFFT training that we've had to know the skills. We just need to pass on enough of that language to them. I like to think of it as we need to teach them how to get around in Paris by speaking French and learning to ask where the bathrooms are, where the transit is, and how to get a good crate. You know, I mean, that's kind of the basics that you're wanting to teach them off the bat, right? The third is that we believe caregivers can overcome their fears that may keep them paralyzed or stuck in unhelpful patterns of relating to their loved ones. So we want to focus on what are the things that are keeping them stuck, what are the blocks that they have, and really free them of the guilt and shame that they feel, and that I have felt as a parent, so that they can really unlock those extraordinary powers. We believe that caregivers just need to be coached. They also need for us to believe in them until they do. Again, they're going to come back into your office likely and say, it didn't go so well. My son or daughter saw right through me, tried it a couple times. There just didn't seem to, I was too tired at the end of the day. They're going to come back with some excuses, and that's okay. Expect that. That's where they need for us to believe in them and say, you've got this, try it again. I know it sounds like it's scripted right now. It will become more natural in time. Stick with it. You know what? Let's practice a little bit in the office right now. Let's get the language skills to a point where you feel more confident going and using them in a real life situation. So they need for us to believe in them until they feel that same way, until they start to see some of the transformation. And then the fifth is that we believe the content on this slide will be scary for some. And we believe that for two reasons. The first is that parents will likely call you saying, again, I feel like I've said or done enough. And if I say or do anything else, it pushes them over the edge. I'm not going to be able to live with myself. Too much guilt, too much shame. And the second is that I'm too exhausted. I need someone else to just take over for me. So it might be scary for parents to hear that you're entrusting them with the skills and that you believe that they can be the agents of change. So those, again, core beliefs, I'm sure most of you do have them in the first couple of pages of any handout that you've received from a training. Honestly, just learn. I really made an effort to commit these to memory, and it really has proven helpful to just keep on going back and understanding this is the foundation. So I would encourage you to do the same. Sleep with them under your pillow. It just transfers through osmosis, I'm sure. So let's talk about why does it even matter? Why does it matter if I'm fluent in this language whatsoever? I mean, isn't it just good enough that I go to these trainings and I have these sheets and I can refer to them? And isn't that good enough? Why do I have to become fluent as a clinician? So let's talk about how we develop a fluency. So first things first is we start slowly. And I think Adele oftentimes will say the phrase at the trainings that it feels like we're drinking out of a fire hydrant. And that really, that is the feeling after 2 days of EFFT training, but for good reason. I mean, they have a period of time where they need to get this information out to us. So you really do feel like you are getting a thesaurus, a dictionary, and an encyclopedia of EFFT in 2 days. And that is just not a possibility to think that you are going to know everything there is to know in that 2 days without going back and rereading it and talking about it and doing the webinars and doing some supervision. But when we go back to the basics of how do we develop a fluency for those that are either just very new to EFFT or have just done the first training, start slowly. Get the basics down, get that understanding of what the core beliefs are, understand validation and the deeper part of validation and the reasons why we say that because. So start slowly. Learn how to say the common phrases. The second thing is that we practice, the third thing, sorry, on there, is that we practice in various ways. So I have actually started to do this at home myself. So I'll actually take out a piece of paper from my journal or in books. My family probably thinks I'm nuts because when my kids are old enough that they can read some of the books that I do this in, I mean, it will just be in the middle of a book and I'll just find the blank empty page at the back and I will write down, I feel because, and because, and because. And I can't tell you how much that has transformed my own life. And it is really helpful when parents come in, and I have been practicing this myself. And so now, again, it just flows a little bit more off of my tongue than it would if I wasn't practicing this at all. So I'll validate my own feelings. The second thing is that I oftentimes will ask parents to validate their kids' emotions as they go for the drive home from my office to their home. Is think of one of those really hard things that came up this week when you were just like, oh my goodness, I didn't know what to say. We didn't know what to do. And let's talk about how we could validate that. Let's go back and forth. I will do this with my husband as well in the car, and we will just practice validating some of those tricky situations that come up as parents. So it's good. It's a good opportunity to practice the language when the kiddo's not in the car with you. And then oftentimes just explaining EFFT when you're out for coffee with a friend. This happens more often than not. It's probably because people know that I'm a clinician, and we'll talk about situations with their kids. And it's amazing how much it comes up in my course of conversation throughout the week, explaining EFFT. And again, that just creates more of a home for it in your heart and in your head when you talk about it more and more. And we also develop a fluency when we admit what we don't know. And I mentioned this with my supervision sessions with Adele. It's really hard to say, I actually have no idea what you were talking about during the trainings or what is written on this slide. I pretended that I did, and I actually have no clue what a block is or how to start, or this is what I think it is, and it might not be. So admitting what we don't know. Or else what happens is if we don't admit what we don't know, we get a whole other language that is started and will continue to be developed if we don't go back to talking about the basics and making sure that we're on the right track. It's giving ourselves the grace to learn this new language and saying, hey, I'm really not sure what the block is. I've been working with this family for a while. Can you help me out? And either talking with a supervisor about that, talking amongst staff, sending an email in, whatever the case may be. But again, give yourself the grace that you are really learning a new language. You're not expected to know exactly how to pronounce things right off the bat. And even down the road, I mean, a year and a half later, there's still things that I definitely struggle with. There's cases that come up that they're really tricky and I don't know what the blocks are. And it is so helpful for others to come on board and say, have you thought about it from this angle? What about this angle? Could it be this? Could it be that? So really important that when you're thinking, I'm not so sure, talk about it with someone. We have all been there. We all have to learn this language from somewhere. All right. So the wonderful question of how long will it take? when I looked up how long does it take to learn a new language, this is what came up. It said teachers know the answer isn't as simple as it seems on how long it takes to learn a new language. It's dependent on different things, such as how different the second language is from the mother tongue, how old the individual is, whether they can speak other languages, how much time they will have to study outside the classroom, and their motivation and ability to practice. I don't think that this is much different than learning how to speak EFFT. So when we look at learning this EFFT language, we really do have to say, how different is it than the modalities that I have used prior in my practice? If you're just solely trained as one form of therapy and you're really intent on using that, does it differ much from that? Is there some crossover with what you've studied before? So we look at how different this new language is from the others, and that can kind of tell, it's going to take a little bit longer to learn this one because it's so vastly different than anything else that I've learned before. And I think that we can really rest assured that this is a really different language for parents. I know as a parent myself, when my girls came home from the hospital, I did not get a manual. I knew that when they started crying, my goal as a parent was to stop that crying. And I think as my kids age, that has not changed that much. No one's told me otherwise until EFFT came along and said, actually, they can figure a lot of this out themselves. They just need your support and encouragement. And when I look back on some of the things that my kids have done, I a lot of times use the metaphor of walking with parents when kids learn to walk. So when our girls were babies and getting to that 13th month mark of, getting themselves to standing and to taking their first couple steps, when they fell, I did not immediately rush over and go and pick them up and say, you know what, I know how to do this better. I've been walking for a lot of years. I'm just going to pick you up. I'm never going to put you down again. What you do as parents is, of course, you say, oh my goodness, that must have hurt so badly. I feel so bad for, oh my goodness, yes, ouchies. And then you encourage them that they've got this in them. Look at those strong legs. You got this. You can do this. And you keep on encouraging them so that eventually they do learn how to walk. Is it going to be as good as you at first? Absolutely not. But over time, they're going to learn how to use those little legs that God gave them when they were born. And that is the same with learning the language of EFFT as well. I've realized that I have actually done this before in my life. It's with teaching my kids how to walk. And I think that same metaphor can be used when parents come back with that feedback that I initially mentioned. Okay, well, does that mean that it didn't feel natural? I know how to do this. I can fix it. So I'm going to pick them up and not let them learn how to walk on their own. No, you go back to the fact that they do have this. It's hard for them to fall. It's hard for you to see them fall, but encouraging them that they've got this, and encouraging parents as far as the language of EFFT is concerned, that you've got this, you can do this, you can learn this, I believe in you. So how different is it from the second language? How old are they? I don't know. I think you can always EFFT. It can be taught to anyone at any different age, and we know that from the studies. Whether they can speak other languages, again, just how flexible are you in learning something new and something that might be different than what you've spoken before. And again, how much time they have to study outside the classroom. Super important that as clinicians, we keep up with our studies. The 2-day trainings are great. The supervision sessions are great, but ensuring that we are continually feeding ourselves with this language, where we're able to practice it and study it. There was another quote from the linguist about how long it would take to learn a new language. And so learning a totally new language, the linguist said, if we are able to put in 10 hours a day to learn a new language, then basic fluency in the easy languages should take 48 days. And for difficult languages, 72 days if you had 10 hours a day to practice. Accounting for days off, that equates to 2 months or 3 months time. If you only put in 5 hours a day, it will take twice as long. Now, thank goodness EFFT will not take that long to learn. But I say that to make the point that it does require dedication to learning this type of therapy. learning the little intricacies, the ins and outs, and really going back and studying a lot of your notes, practicing outside of just the advanced trainings or the training, or again, meeting with those supervision sessions. So how long will it take? That really depends on how much we're able to invest as far as time is, but it is worth the investment, I can tell you that much. I actually took this along on a recent trip. These are just my EFFT notes from one of the trainings, and I took it along on a recent trip over to Europe and just pulled it out every once in a while. And I mean, I think if you think, oh my goodness, at one sitting, I've got to get through all the notes. But honestly, if you can just review the slides either by yourself or commit to meeting once a week as a team and just saying, hey, let's pick 4 slides to go over and just talk about them and talk about the different notes that you have. I mean, I'm sure this is what my notes look like. So it's like half the slides, half my written hand. And just committing to going over some of them as a team would be awesome. Oh, this is what I got from that. This is what I got from that. Hearing the different accents maybe that others are bringing to their EFFT language. So helpful ways to increase your fluency. Again, reading over your notes or your slides. I will practice what I hear from parents outside the office setting. When I'm driving in my car, I'll think of the responses that I may have heard from parents from what they've heard from their kids. So she's so angry, she won't attend any of the sessions. She's told me that we love her sister more than we love her. Whatever it is, I will come up with my own becauses outside of the session when the parents go, again, just to increase my level of fluency. And then chair work. I'll oftentimes do some chair, whether in the session that I'm with the parents, I do chair work or not in those first few sessions. I will go over once they leave what the potential chair work in the future will look like and kind of just do the back and forth by myself. And it's amazing. Now I can actually just picture chair work in my head and really quickly play the scenarios back and forth and see what the end result is. But that is a matter of practicing. Practice with your team. That can't be said enough. Tell others about EFFT anytime that you can. Use your own lab. I really feel like my house has started to become a lab for practicing EFFT. My husband, who's an accountant, so maybe not the most emotionally sensitive guy in the world, although he is quite amazing. Last week, our little one was being a bit of a stinker in the morning, and I wrote him and said that she was, and it was a really hard morning. And he wrote back, and this is a guy who comes from a really fix-it background where it was usually, well, why don't you drop her off at your mom's place? Why don't you give her a time out? Whatever, fix it. And he just wrote back, that must have been really hard. And I was like, you just said bonjour in EFFT, way to go. And that was it. He didn't say anything else. He didn't add any becauses. That must have been so hard because. But he just started off with the basics, right? And I gotta say, I mean, I wrote back and I said, nice validation. But I must say that him saying that back to me as a response and knowing that it was slightly scripted felt so much better than the usual, why don't you try this? Why don't you do this? Oh, it's not. Oh, you know what? I'll be home at 3. I'll take her off your hands at that point in time, right? I didn't need him to do that. I just needed him to say, man, that's got to be really hard. That was enough. So use your own lab, practice in your house, teach your family these skills. It's pretty awesome. And then also to increase your fluency, give yourself a load of grace. This again is a brand new language that you're learning how to speak. So give yourself some grace. If I would have gone over to Germany and thought, you know what, 2 weeks in, I should know how to speak this language. I'm going to beat myself up if I don't. I would have had a really miserable time over there. So give yourself the grace to mess up a little bit and have fun with it, laugh about it. That's all part of learning this new language. And then be really grateful. I think, I'm 37 years old now, and I feel really grateful that I can teach this language to my kids. It's something that I didn't get growing up. And I don't blame my parents. That wasn't the priority at that time, wasn't their parents' priority, and so on and so forth, back through the generations. But I feel really grateful that now I get to have a language that means so much to me, and I get to teach that to my kids, and they get to teach it to their kids. And so I've always wanted to teach a second language to my kids. I just didn't know that it would be EFFT. So it's pretty awesome when we get to teach this language to others. It's probably more useful than German. I also want to talk a little bit about self-care and about being present. I think that self-care is a phrase we throw around in the clinician world, but we really do need to talk about self-care amongst us as clinicians for a couple of reasons. To learn anything new, it takes a lot of head space. And for EFFT, it takes a lot of heart space as well. So when I think about learning something new, while I'm, patting your head and rubbing your tummy in circles and being asked to speak a new language, that's really difficult. It would be much easier if I could take my hand off my head and my hand off my stomach and have that space to learn a new language. So we really do need to slow down in order to absorb and really understand and start to be able to speak fluently. And we need to do that as clinicians if we're going to teach this new language to our families. We need to ensure that we're filling our tanks as clinicians. We do not do the world's easiest job with really listening to some fairly devastating and hard stories that come into our office. So we really need to make sure we are filling our tanks equally as they are being drained. And that will look different for absolutely everyone. I will oftentimes go over the analogy of everyone having their own tank and everyone having their unique fuel blend. So what fills my tank may not fill yours, may not fill my husband's. Everyone has their own unique blend of fuel. So usually what I will have individuals do is just draw a picture of a tank, draw what fills it, draw what drains it, and really ask themselves, how much are you filling your tank at this point in time in your life? What we find, and what I certainly find with parents who are going through really difficult circumstances with their kiddos, is that their tanks are totally drained. They are burnt right out. They are pulled over to the side of the road with their hazards on, and they've got absolutely no fuel in their tank. I feel as a clinician, I really need to demonstrate for them what filling their tanks look like. I need to make sure that I'm coming to each session with a full fuel tank, because I'm actually pouring some of that out into theirs in hopes that they will learn how to fuel themselves as well. So really important that we learn how to fill our own tanks and ensure that we're not running on empty. This is important too, because as a clinician and speaking this language, it's really important for me to be practicing this at home. This is not a therapy that I feel like I leave at the door at the end of the day and just go back to my mother tongue when I'm talking with my kids. Of course, we're not going to use EFFT in every single scenario that comes up in our home. So if my daughter chooses not to eat broccoli one day, I'm not going to say, I can understand why you would be so disgusted with that gross green vegetable, because it tastes really bitter and because it gives you gas and because. But I am going to want to be there when she says, you know what? I felt like I didn't have anyone to talk to at the schoolyard today. And usually when that happens is past bedtime, 8:30 at night. I'm tired. I know she should be in bed. But that's why self-care and knowing that I've got to be fueling my tank throughout the day, because these circumstances are going to come up. And if I'm teaching to families what I'm not practicing myself, I don't feel I'm doing a very good job as a clinician. So I really want to make sure I have fuel in my tank so when those circumstances do arise with my daughters, I'm able to be there and I'm able to validate. I'm able to have enough energy to do that for them. And also it allows me to see what it must be like for parents who are going through the motions with their kids too, right? I totally get it. I get that I'm exhausted. I get that I'm tired, but I'm making it a priority to fill my tank. And I really feel like parents can do the same for themselves and for their families as well. So filling your tank, practicing in the real world, we chatted a little bit about that. And then important to model both practicing in the real world to our clients as well as keeping our tanks full. Okay. All right. So let's talk about then what the next steps could look like for you as clinicians, or maybe your parents who have joined us, to talk about what will the next steps be for you to increase your fluency. For some of you, you may hear my story and be like, yeah, I stopped after that first training. I really was jazzed about using it. As soon as I left, I wanted to use it with everything. And then a couple weeks passed, I hadn't used it. And then I was like, I'm not sure I can speak that language anymore. So I really haven't picked it up since then. What is your next step going to be? For those who have done the trainings, they've done the advanced trainings, they're meeting consistently with supervision. How can you up your game even more? How can you create more fluency? So just think about where you are right now as far as how comfortable you are speaking the EFFT language. And then think about what might the next step be. Might it be I'm going to sign up for the next training? Might it be I'm going to commit to doing these webinars every time they come up? Could it be that you are going to sign up for one-on-one supervision? Go one-on-one with the great one, with Adele, and you will get this. Who knows what that looks like? It could be committing to going on a walk with a coworker that may work in a totally different section than you and telling them about EFFT. It could mean seeing one less client a month and instead committing that time to EFFT. Even better, one less client a week and committing that session to EFFT time together in a group. And discussion around EFFT. So what one thing will you do to become more fluent? I jumped the gun there. That's B. And then A, what one thing will you take away to free up your capacity? So it could look like, yeah, I am going to cut one client off my roster and I'm instead going to focus that time on EFFT. It could be that I'm going to go to bed 1 hour earlier so that I can get up 1 hour earlier and go to my notes. Or, instead of watching Netflix at night, maybe not as riveting as some of the stuff out there on Netflix. However, you could pick this up and, commit to honestly just going through a slide or two each night. And before you know it, you'll be through the deck and you will become more fluent. So what one thing will you take away to free up some capacity to become more fluent? And what one thing will you add so that your fluency increases with EFFT? So that's it as far as my slides are concerned. And in closing, one of my favorite quotes is from Mae West. It's always been one of my favorite quotes. And she said, I never said it was going to be easy. I just said it was going to be worth it. And that for me has definitely been my journey in learning this language of EFFT. It really has been the result of many hours of studying, investments of time and resources, admitting to talk about it, admitting to risk saying, hey, I don't know, and judging myself for that. But if I stopped after leaving my first training or when a Chairwork session didn't go as planned, I would really have never been able to see the amazing healing that can happen through EFFT. And I really say that first and foremost for myself. I mean, that first day that Adele did a Chairwork session with me around something that had happened with my daughter that I had been holding on to for such a long time that she had moved way past, I would have still been under that huge mountain of guilt and shame and still would not be parenting the way that my daughters deserve to be parented and allowing myself the freedom to parent how I know how to parent. So I say it first personally, I would never have been able to see the amazing healing power that can happen through EFFT, and then with the families that I've worked with who have either become unstuck or who are trapped under that burden of guilt and shame. They were freed from their blocks. There's been forgiveness offered where once there was such strong lines drawn in the sand. So I know I have not arrived. I'm not as fluent as I would like to be. This is a fairly new language for me, but I will continue to learn. I will continue to practice it. I will continue to grow and teach others my passion and become more fluent in this incredible language of love, empowerment, and transformation. I'm grateful to Adele and her team for teaching the world this language, and may we never stop speaking it.
Thank you so much, Kristin. That was really lovely. And it was actually a very good reminder for me as well, because when I'm teaching, when I'm training, sometimes I do forget how hard it is to adopt a new language, because it's been something that I've been working on for so long, and it's been my first language for a number of years now. And so it was actually a really, really, really good reminder for me to slow down. And, I've been inspired recently to actually present less in the context of the 2 days so that there could be a bit more depth. And so you've actually given me some food for thought in terms of how to do it better, how to help facilitate it so that it's not so challenging. But we do have some questions. And so the first question is asking for suggestions for students or folks who are provisionally registering to become a psychotherapist. So suggestions for increasing skills while working under supervisors not trained in the model. And so I can throw out some ideas, and then we'll check in with you, Kristin, as well. Mm-hmm. So first of all, we do have a number of videos that are available for individuals who want to learn about the model, different components of the model. And so you can watch those for sure. And that doesn't cost anything other than a donation, which is whatever fits your budget. And there's also the newsletter that you can subscribe to. And the newsletter every month has either EFFT resources or EFFT related resources that you can access. And again, no charge. There are a couple of online trainings that are available at any given time where no EFFT background is required. And so you can participate in those trainings. Now, if there is a discrepancy between what you'd like to be doing and what your supervisor is offering, could be a great time to have conversations, about the why and the how. And of course, understanding that if you're being supervised under someone's registration number, ultimately they are responsible for your work. And so you have to kind of follow that. But there's a slide deck that I sometimes offer through the newsletter, and it's EFFT the basics. And so you might want to do a presentation to your peer group, to your student group, to your team, to kind of share the information and maybe kind of share some of the new elements of the language. Kristin, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's excellent. The newsletters really are such a great resource. There's so many different links on there to information that is just invaluable. So absolutely.
There's also a peer supervision network that we're creating. And so if you go to EFFTinternational.org, under the certification tab, there's an opportunity to sign up for the peer supervision network, and there are instructions there. And the purpose of that peer supervision network is to be able to connect with other people of varying backgrounds with different intensity in terms of training. So people who have no training, people who have lots of training, so that you can connect together and practice parent block chair work with each other, clinician block chair work with each other, or share ideas, or try out the caregiver trapped scale in different ways. So that has no cost associated with it. It's really a community kind of built effort. So that's another possibility. So again, that can be found under the certification tab at www.EFFTinternational.org. It's also going to be available in the next newsletter. Kristin, I had a question for you about your journey. So, it's really remarkable for me that all of this has happened in such a short period of time. When you talk about the fluencies, it's so encouraging. And if we think about the number of supervision sessions you had, it wasn't really that there weren't that many, and to see where you are, it's really, really encouraging. So I wanted to ask, what was the one or two aspects of the model that you found the most difficult to integrate, or the most difficult to kind of activate in your practice?
Mm-hmm. Definitely chair work, because you just feel like, I'm going to look like an idiot. I'm going to try this. And I mean, I remember being in therapy years ago where my clinician tried to get me to, like, you sit there, then you come over and, it wasn't chair work. Like, I know chair work, but I remember thinking, I feel ridiculous. So I was skeptical of chair work at first, and then also really not understanding the blocks at all, not understanding, okay, I think I get, but then feeling like, no, I'm getting this wrong time and time again. So really understanding the chair work and feeling that I could ask, how do we get at those blocks, and understanding how to get at the blocks. And I mean, Adele, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I kind of see the blocks as stories, right? Stories that we're telling ourselves as parents about, no, I've got to keep on beating myself up over this. She's never going to forget this. This is why she is here now. Mm-hmm. So understanding the blocks and understanding what the stories are. So the chair work, to me, it was something for me that I had to get it to click and then start using it. The really helpful piece of that, though, was being able to use that sheet of paper and going over it. And even if it feels awkward for the parents, to know, I know what the end result is going to be. Yeah. And it's going to be one where the parent gets new perspective on how their kid's feeling.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I just filmed a new instructional video for caregiver block chair work. And at the beginning of the video, I make a statement about having the sheet on my lap. And I explain why, because if I get stressed or if I get caught into the moment, I lose my capacity to kind of be connected to the words on the paper. And it was hilarious. And some of you will eventually see this video because we're going to make it available. But at one point, I skipped a step. I was so in the moment, with the caregiver, that I literally skipped a step. And so I comment on it in the moment so that people can see, even though, this is a script that I've been working on for years, I still make mistakes. I still forget steps. And so just giving yourself permission to have that with you, and to even explain to the client why it is that you have it. It's emotion theory, if anything else. The other thing I thought of when I was listening to you chat, so the other thing I thought of was around fluency in caregivers. Sometimes I note in some of the supervision sessions that I offer that clinicians want to encourage caregivers to use the emotion coaching all the time. And I just want to say to the clinicians who are listening, we want to actually avoid that, because it's a new language. It takes a lot out of us. And so it's kind of like willpower. There's only so much. And so if we can actually coach the parents and the caregivers to use the emotion coaching framework in a targeted way, specifically related to the issues that their children are struggling with, that will actually be better, because they'll have access to more resources for the moments that really matter when it comes to their loved one's health. So don't worry if they don't validate, and offer emotional or practical support around bedtime, if bedtime's not the biggest issue. Instead, focus on those clinical scenarios that are most related to the mental health issues that are relevant for that family. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So someone wrote in, I love blocks as stories. And so that's fantastic. I mean, the blocks they're stories, and they have emotional charge to them, and they feel really real, whether they're the caregiver stories or the clinician stories. One of the things that I've been including in different trainings is this notion that as clinicians, we should avoid actually determining whether or not a caregiver should do chair work, for example, and instead check with the parent themselves to see, like express to them like, hey, I have this concern, about the appropriateness of this intervention or the timing of this intervention. I'm a bit worried about, overwhelming you or overburdening you. What do you think? I think it could be helpful, but I don't want to deplete you even further because ultimately that will not be productive. And so where are you at with all of this? So that's something else that kind of that I thought of as you were chatting and learning this new language. Timing and checking in and intensity so that parents and caregivers can increase their chances for success.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, Kristin, before we close out the webinar today?
Keep learning the language. It's a beauty. It is such a beautiful language and really has had the most impact on my practice as well as on me personally.
Fantastic. Thanks to everyone who participated. It's great to have you. Have a great day.